number 5, God will provide. You probably already know the story, right? But do you? Just kidding. How's that? Build suspense. That's what I'm trying to do here. Quick review, just to go through the 2, I'll say, main names that we see. Starting in Genesis 1, the very first word or name for God we get is Elohim, often shortened to El. Some of the names of God we will look at. We'll start with El. We've already looked at a couple. We'll review. This is a generic word for God. It can mean God, as in the God of the Bible, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but it can mean any God. It can mean mighty one. It's used various ways in the Hebrew Bible, but about 2,500 times it refers to God. The covenant name of God, and by far the most often used name for God, is this, which we typically pronounce Yahweh, but that's a guess because it was never written fully and properly and never pronounced by the Hebrew people. Yah is the shortened form, and we've talked about both from El and Yah. You see that as a part of people's names to reference God. Daniel or Isaiah. We have these names of many important people in the Bible that have these, and maybe one of the ones that's pretty important is Yeshua, which is Joshua in the Old Testament, but would be the name of Jesus, which is the kind of the Greek version of the New Testament. So Yahweh about 7,000 times, and because, like I said, we don't know how it's pronounced, it's because if a Jewish person was reading the Torah, was reading the Hebrew Bible, or was talking about it, if they see this name, they would either say Adonai, which is another generic name for God, doesn't show up about 400 times in the text itself, but became a replacement for this covenant name of God. Or they would just say Hashem, which means the name, referring to this particular name of God. So the 2 most prevalent, Elohim, more generic, Yahweh, or sometimes Jehovah, which we'll use tonight, very specific to the God who has revealed himself as the I am, and that word that is the 4 consonants Yahweh is based upon the Hebrew word for I am or I will. The name we talked about a couple weeks ago was El Elyon. So you see El is repeated twice. El, short for Elohim, El. And the Yon, this idea is the goddess God. How's that? Or God Most High. The repetition intensifies the idea that this is talking about, or we might say the God above gods, or the God over gods is the idea. God out the yonder God, as it were. You use an English word for that suffix relates to God Most High. And we talked a little bit about some of the places in the scripture where it indicates that there is a spiritual realm full of possible gods to worship, and the only one worthy of worship is the Most High God Most High. And then I think last week, it was just last week, right? We looked at this name of God, El Roi, the God who sees, in relation to the story of Hagar. After she becomes pregnant, she is abused by Sarah, and she runs away. And while she's running for her life, trying to get back to her homeland of Egypt, God meets her there, and she gives him this name. You are the God who sees, or the God who sees me, and even names a well there after this God. So that was last week, and I want you to remember this one because I think there's a connection a little bit to this week. I'm trying to go sort of chronological now through the Hebrew Bible as we look at names of God. And so this was in Genesis 16. Tonight, we're going to be in Genesis 22. And so we're still in the account of Abraham himself. We kind of pick up the story. The story of God who sees has to do with Abraham and Sarah trying to make God's promises come about because he wasn't working fast enough. None of us have ever felt that before. And that didn't go well at all. And so she is kind of in this. In chapter 22, we've moved on, and now the son of promise has been born, Isaac, the one that God promised through he and Sarah, the one that Sarah laughed about when that promise was made, and the angels that came and visited Abraham and Sarah before the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah talked about. And so we pick up the story at the beginning of Genesis 22. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. Don't you love how specific the Bible is? Just sometime later. If you go to the end of chapter 23, it talks about they lived in this place for many years. And then chapter 24 opens with sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abram, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. So the first thing that jumps out at me is the end of this, on a mountain I will show you. Now, is this a familiar refrain in Abraham's story? Yes, it is, because in Genesis 12, verse 1, the call of Abraham, God calls Abraham to leave where he is and go to the place I will show you. So there's something about this story of Abraham, this little refrain keeps coming up. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather have specific instructions. Like, could you imagine sitting in your car and we get from point A to point B with this thing, right? We use our phone connected to our car. Anybody else do that? And could you imagine just saying, hey, Siri, show me the place that you need to show me? And see, she's going to do that now because she heard me.
I found this on the web. Show me the
Coyote theory. Yeah, and she heard me right. So anyway, but where would we end up? Who knows, right? You're at the mercy of wherever that entity, that thing, that algorithm says you need to go. And we just don't work that way, right? If I want to go somewhere, I want to get there. I was talking to Al, who was here on the way out. Noticed he was driving a Tesla, and I asked him if he liked the car. He says, best car I ever owned. And then he explained to me that, and showed me, he says, I just get in the car, buckle my seatbelt, and say, navigate home, and push a button, and I don't have to steer. I'm like, you're a braver man than that. I'm not going to try that. Yeah. I'm not that trusting.
If there's any problem in the road, if they've got anything marked off, it doesn't do. You better be there to change it because they've got.
Oh, like if you have to change lanes or whatever?
Well, if there's the road's not in its usual form, if they're fixing the road, it goes back to where people have to drive it. You can't just keep going.
You know, I know I've taken a detour here, but I'm sorry. That's not.
I'm not into that.
I just can't. He's a braver fellow than me. And if anybody here is a Tesla owner, no offense intended, more power to you. But anyway, so could you imagine? I can't imagine just telling my car, telling my GPS, show me where you want to take me. It doesn't work that way for me. I want to feel, dare I say, some measure of control. And both in the beginning of the story of Abraham and here again, God's direction to him is, I'm going to show you something. You just have to trust me. He also says, the second thing that catches my attention in this is it says, sometime later, God tested Abraham. Why would God need to test Abraham? Oh, I don't know, because he's messed up a few times. Chapter 12, where we first meet Abram at that point, he's called, and God does some good things, right? He does some amazing things, and this is one of those places where it's pretty remarkable. But we also have seen him be a bonehead. That's the Hebrew term, I think. In fact, in chapter 12, he's called, and he leaves and he goes. And then a little later in chapter 12, they find themselves down in Egypt. And he decides that since his wife is so pretty, he's worried that they'll kill him to have his wife. So he says, tell them you're my sister. And Pharaoh takes Sarah as his wife. Well, probably more into his harem. Who are we kidding? It's hardly a formal arrangement. But anyway, takes her in, and that doesn't work out well, and God reveals, and just a few chapters later, where is it? I wrote it down, I believe, Genesis 23. No? Sorry, wrong place. Genesis 20. A second time happens, and he's running into Abimelech, and chapter 20 does the same thing, only this time he says, but she kind of is my sister, so it's okay. That's another story, another sermon for another day, but nonetheless, both times near tragedy befalls the people that fall for the lie because Abraham is trying to be in control. And then just last week we talked in 16, the whole beautiful plan that worked out so well that we don't have a child, so let's come up with a new plan to make God's plan happen.
Fix it.
And every time Abram comes and says, I want to help God along, or I want to take control back, things get off track.
Yeah.
And so further down the road, it's no surprise that God says, I want to test this fella and see if he's learned his lesson. Have you ever done that with your kiddos? Maybe once or twice. Story continues. Early the next morning, Abram got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. So it's changed a little bit between the first part and this part, from the place I will show you to the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. So, 3 days. Oh, there it is. On the 3rd day. So this journey that Abraham takes, this place that God is going to show him, is a 3-day journey from where he was. Now, if you remember, he says specifically to go to a particular region, go to the region of Moriah. So there's some general direction. Go that way, and there'll be a mountain there. And here is a map that helps you. And in chapter 23, we have, 21, we have Abram down here near Beersheba, where they lived for quite a while. And the journey to get up here to the region of Moriah and the mountain that God will show him, the estimate's about 60 or so miles of this trek. So 3 days, it's not a short journey. I mean, and how did they get there? Well, the old-fashioned way, right? 20 miles a day. And this is, you can kind of see, this isn't exactly a topographical map, but you can see a little bit of the shading if you're familiar with this is the Dead Sea, Salt Sea. So we've got a lot of hill country here, and he's going to the mountain of Moriah, which is going to be uphill, right? Anybody watch, by the way, have you seen I don't know if you guys are on social media or not, the Norwegian cross-country skier that was running on skis uphill at 11 miles an hour?
Oh my goodness.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, there's video of this.
Just backing up the film.
It's quite a thing. Look it up. Norwegian cross is best be one gold, of course, running uphill. And so this is my favorite. Of course, people have to comment. And one person said, this is how my parents explain getting to school every day. Uphill in the snow both ways, right? But he's literally 11 miles an hour. They've got the clock on him, up to almost 11 miles an hour uphill on skis. Crazy. I don't think Abraham and Isaac were going quite that fast. They were going a little more deliberately. 3 days of this journey. It's no small journey. It's nothing, to sneeze at. I wouldn't want to have to take a 60-mile journey on foot over 3 days, 20 miles a day. I mean, years ago, we walked a 10-mile kind of fundraising walk. That's a long way to walk. A couple hours, it took more than a couple hours, I think. 3 or 4 hours, I forget. So we're talking, this is a full day. They're probably in better shape than we are because we drive everywhere. We just tell our cars to take us home and they go, nonetheless, all of this. We're going for 3 days. This is no small feat. So they get there, says here, he leaves the servant behind. You stay here. The boy and I are going to go over there. Story continues. Abraham took the wood from the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, that's where the song came from. Father, yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here, Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. So this is kind of the first hint that we see from Isaac that he's starting to notice something. Now, the question a lot of people ask is, how old is Isaac? Good question. So if you look at kind of what's going on here, we have a few markers, and so we can give you a range. He is between 5 and 37 years old. Because we learned in a couple chapters before he's been weaned from his mother, so that would be around 4 or 5 years old. And shortly thereafter, we know that Sarah dies at 127. She was 90 when she came pregnant with Isaac. So the oldest he could be is 36. But remember, we've already said at the beginning of this chapter, it starts with the phrase sometime later. So we're kind of like the likelihood is not 5 and not 30. Most would say we're pushing teenager or a little older. A few clues also in the text. One, he's smart enough to know how things are supposed to work. So he's had to have some familiarity with the process of sacrifice, with the things that are necessary for sacrifice. He knows what's supposed to happen. Number 2, he is able to make a 60-mile round trip journey. At least he thinks it's round trip. Abraham isn't so sure. By himself. You don't bring a 5-year-old on that kind of a journey, right? He's got to. And when we get here, as the two of them went on together, who is carrying the heavy stuff? He took the wood for the burnt offering. So, made a fire in the woods. It takes a lot of wood, right? If you're going to do a burn, and if you read the law, and this comes later, I know, but the law for a burnt offering is you burn it all up. You don't just put it on the fire and singe it a little bit or leave it medium rare. If you're going to make a burnt offering, you consume it by the fire. How much wood would you need to take an offering to be consumed, an offering of typically like an animal, a lamb, let's say? How much wood would that be? It's not a couple of logs. It's a lot of wood. Yeah. And he's carrying it, right? Everybody stays behind. He placed the wood on his son. So Isaac is a strapping young lad. Not a kid. The word for son or boy here is kind of generic word. It could mean young. It could mean it could mean servant. It's got a range of semantic meaning. But the idea is he's a healthy, strong young man, or maybe even adult. He could be 17, 18, 20 years old. Don't think he's 30 something, but nonetheless, this is where we are. So this is what we find here that's happening. And that's going to be important because what happens next in this story, you're probably familiar. Things get really interesting. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. In this part, he bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. If you had to consider a 16 to 20-year-old young man in a contest with a 110, 120-year-old guy, who's your money on?
Kid.
Right? So for Isaac to be bound, it says he, meaning Abraham, bound him and laid him on the altar. I think that's doing a lot of work. I think what is happening here is Isaac has allowed this to be done to him, which is remarkable. I know it's a different culture. I know it's a different way, but can you imagine your teenage son letting you tie him up? Probably not. No. There would be some arguments. There would be some struggle. You would just naturally, if it was me, I would be like, what's going on, Dad? Come on for a minute. He told me, blah, blah, blah. God will provide. Why are you laying me on the altar? And then he reaches out and takes the knife. So Abraham is serious about this, right? There's nothing in this text that says to us, Abraham thinks that he's not supposed to kill his son. Now we can talk, you probably know, I know I'm dealing with a lot of folks who've been around church world for a while. Child sacrifice, bad. Normal in the ancient Near East. Other cultures, other religions practice it. They have found archaeological sites of altars with infant skulls. So we have proof that that have been bashed or otherwise show signs of trauma. So it's happening in this culture. But God, when the law comes out, he's against it. It's different from the kind of sacrifices he tells his people to do. And yet here, Abraham shows no sense that he's not supposed to do this. He is, if this is a test, is Abraham passing the test?
Yes.
Absolutely. And it causes me to think of a lot of things, because what does Isaac mean to Abraham, do you think?
Everything.
I mean, it starts out, take your son, your only son, the son who you love, Isaac. So God, in instructing this, makes it clear, Isaac, I don't know if he's like Joseph with a coat of many colors special, because Abraham at this point only has the 2 children. But nonetheless, this would be, for Abraham, Isaac embodies, especially after his kind of taking matters into my own hands and all that went on with Hagar and Ishmael and the problems that caused, Isaac embodies the reality of God's promise every day.
There's that promise will be gone.
So he's going to plunge the knife into his son because that makes sense, right? But he's willing to do it. There's nothing here that says hesitation. And make me wonder. What does he say? I can back up a little bit. And we're going to get to this more. Abraham answers Isaac's question. God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering. This is the crux of the story. We'll get to the end of it where God does exactly this. So Abraham speaks a word of faith, and yet he acts as if he's got to give up the one thing that is the key to God's promise. The whole point of the story is God provides, and maybe it makes me question at times, would I do what Abraham did? Let's not talk about take my son or take a child, because God wouldn't ask us to do that. This is a one-off, like not going to be something they'll repeat. But God may ask me to let go of something that I find is the source of my security, my hope, my sense of purpose and self. What if God came to me, and I've used an example before, and said, Charles, I know you've been saving for retirement since you started in this thing. I want you to empty your retirement account and give it away. Now, that feel like picking the knife up. Are you sure, God? Are we positive about this? Because that's supposed to be, right? That would be crazy. Denise is watching and going, what is he talking about? I mean, could you imagine? Or even, not even that. Not like, what if it was just as simple as go online, find out how much is in your bank account, and empty that bank account and take it and give it to the food bank. Or give it to this person who can't pay their rent, or give it to whatever. The whole thing, God? Really? So that's what he's asking Abraham to do, and Abraham is willing to do it. Of course, we get a little hint. This is because we're in Genesis, we're early in the story, but the Bible talks about this later in Hebrews 11. Abraham shows up, and it mentions this, which is kind of interesting. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned, according to the writer of Hebrews, that God can even raise the dead. And so we get this little glimpse in Hebrews that what's going on in Abraham's mind as he's raising the knife. He's saying, if I follow through for this, the only way that this is going to work out as if God raises the dead. Hey, good news, God's specialty is kind of bringing dead things back to life. And so in a manner of speaking, the writer of Hebrews says, he did receive Isaac back from death. But back to the story. But the angel of the Lord, there we go, now we're getting somewhere, called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham, here am I, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. See, this is what I want. So, okay, God, I'm going to go to the bank and I'm going to empty my retirement account right before I give the money to the other person. I want to hear the angel of the Lord say, no, never mind, you can keep it. If I knew that, maybe I'd be okay. Abraham doesn't know that. He reasons, his way of thinking is somehow come back to life, maybe.
He has to come back to life because he said you're for generations. So I would think the same as he. How am I going to have generations of a family if I kill my only son? So he truly believed that he would raise him from the dead, I guess.
It's just pretty remarkable, but thanks be to God, he comes and intervenes, and he doesn't, because even if he raised him from the dead, if that's the story. Could you imagine Isaac was saying, Dad, remember that time you stabbed me and tried to kill me? He killed City all the rest of his life. So that wouldn't work out well either, right? But what I want you to know is this is the second time we've seen that. When God, or in this case, the angel of the Lord calls to Abraham, what does he say?
Here I am.
Here I am. Now that may ring a bell. One place that rings a bell to me, maybe is that what you're thinking? Isaiah 6? Isaiah? Is that what you were thinking? Yeah? Miss Patty? Yeah. That here I am, send me. But I'm also reminded of the first time we hear from God, and it's when he's in the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3.
Yeah.
And his question is, where are you? So here's the takeaway. God calls you, you better answer. Because if he comes looking for you, it's probably not going to end. Just like my dad, when he called me, if he had to say, where are you, boy? That was not going to end well. I don't know if God uses that tone. But it's just an interesting little, I find it fascinating. Maybe it's just me. When you read it and you see all of these connections. And I think I have that chart Denise gave me. I might have shown it to you before, that all the allusions and connections in the Bible, it's really remarkable how they're all kind of woven together on this book that was written over 1,500 years by almost 40 different authors, and the way that all of that works. It's really fascinating. This is one of those things. So the angel of the Lord calls from heaven, don't lay a hand on the boy. I know that you fear me because you have not withheld your son. Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket, he saw a ram caught by its horns. So he went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. What must Isaac be thinking right now?
Yeah.
I wonder, it doesn't say here, it says the angel of the Lord called to him. He called Abraham. Do you think, I've wondered, did Isaac hear that? Because even if he submitted to being bound, when Dad's got the knife, what's his blood pressure doing? He's got to be just freaking out some way. I don't know if he heard any of this, but what must he be feeling here? This isn't just a lesson for Abraham, is it? This is one that would stick with Isaac probably the rest of his life. And he takes the ram and he sacrifices it. And so Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, I like this. This is the second time we've seen this. To this day, like last week with the well, to this day, you can go there and the well is there. On the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. So the Lord will provide, you may know. Here is the Hebrew. I learned it Jehovah Jireh, but for our cases, we're using the Tetragrammaton, the Yahweh Jireh, same thing. Jehovah Yahweh, same word. Yahweh Jireh means, as we see here, God will provide, but this is kind of fun. The root of this word, that's Jireh, is the word that means to see. Now, wait a minute. Didn't we hear last week that God had a name that was what? El Roi, the God who sees. This word is related linguistically to the same word in El Roi. And it means the God will see, or God will look, or we would say God will see to it or look after it. There's a connection between these two names of God attached to the other kind of standard names of God. And I think it's interesting because when we say God will provide, and this is where I think the interconnectedness of the scriptures is so beautiful. We miss, and listen, if we're a little more literal, God will see to it. We see that what happened in Genesis 16 with Hagar and what happens in Genesis 22 with Abraham, they're like playing off of each other. That as God reveals himself to his people, he's showing us from Hagar's perspective, who is mistreated, who is running for her life, who is scared. Hey, look, God sees you then, but don't you also want to know God sees you when you're faithful and when you're obedient? Now we probably think, well, God, of course God sees us when we're faithful and obedient, because that's kind of his deal. So maybe we don't like it, but I think linguistically it's connecting these two narratives together. For Abraham, in the issue with Hagar, when she's run away, he is about to lose what he thinks is the inheritance, the son. Because what if she doesn't come back? What if she's injured or killed on her journey? What if I never see her again? What if I never see that boy again? Right? And here he's about to lose son. And in both times, we see the name of God connected to God sees this. There's none of this that's out of God's control, even though sometimes we would rather be thinking we're in control. I was like, no. Whether you're scared to death or whether you're confident in what you're doing, don't worry, I got it covered. I'm not going to let my plans be thwarted. I'm the God who sees, not the God who sees to the things that I promise. It's really a fascinating kind of a part there. Now, I want you to notice, before we go on, this. Now, we called this series, What's in a Name? We talked about the names of God. But I want you to notice here, it says, so Abraham didn't call God the Lord will provide. What did he call? That place. That Abraham called that place the Lord will provide. And to this day, it is said, on the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. So Abraham was told to leave where he was and go to the place I will show you in the region of Moriah, and to a particular mountain. Mount Moriah is what the mountain is. We can back up a few places, and I don't know if you know your Israeli geography. You may be ahead of me a little bit, but here's where Mount Moriah is. You can Bethel and Jabus and Jericho. These are kind of Old Testament places. Not really always named and central to it, but Mount Moriah is kind of up here, toward the north end of the Dead Sea. Here's the Jordan River, the tributary that goes into the Dead Sea. And Abraham calls that place, right? Where are we? That place the Lord will provide. So is there anything significant about that place? I'm glad you asked. So the Lord sent a plague on Israel. 2 Samuel 24. So the Lord sent a plague on Israel from that morning until the end of the time designated, and 70,000 of the people from Dan to Beersheba died. When the angel stretched out his hand to destroy Jerusalem, the Lord relented concerning the disaster and said to the angel who was afflicting the people, enough, withdraw your hand. The angel of the Lord was then at the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. The threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. Remember that. The threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. So, it's a fascinating story. And I think it's the last chapter of 2 Samuel, if I'm not mistaken. It's almost like a postscript to Samuel scroll that tells the story where David takes a census. And it's problematic to God, and David realizes it. And the prophet says to David, okay, you've messed up. I'm going to give you 3 choices of what can happen to the people because of you. You can have a famine. You can have a famine, I think it's for 3 years. You can be chased by your enemies for 3 months, or the Lord will send a plague for 3 days. Your pick, David. What a great choice, right? Multiple choice. You can't go wrong there. And so this is where the story picks up. But he chose the plague. And the plague comes, and you think, oh, it's just 3 days. How many people? 70,000 die. 3 days, that's bad news, right? 70,000 people, 3 days. And the angel stretched out his hand. The Lord relented, said, enough, withdraw your hand. The angel of the Lord was, where was he? Threshing floor of Araunah. When David saw the angel who was striking down the people, he said to the Lord, I have sinned, I the shepherd have done wrong, these are but sheep. What have they done? Let your hand fall on me and my family. So David is like, okay, that's enough, God. 70,000. They didn't do anything wrong. I did wrong. If you're going to punish somebody, punish me. Makes sense. David is a good king, a good shepherd. He learned it when he was a shepherd. And so the story goes on that day, Gad is the prophet who told him originally, you have a choice, and laid it out, went to David and said to him, go up and build an altar of the Lord. Where? The threshing floor of Araunah, this guy. Gad, the Jebusite. So David went up as the Lord had commanded through Gad. So there's something about this threshing floor that seems important. What is a threshing floor?
Separate out wheat.
There it is, to separate wheat. So you take the wheat, you kind of crush it against the hard surfaces of the floor. Sometimes you throw it up in the air, the wind would take the chaff away, the heavier wheat would settle. So this is what it was. Threshing in the Old Testament Hebrew Bible is also a symbol for judgment. It comes up that God threshes his people. So threshing is significant. A threshing floor is significant. In this story, it's where David saw the angel striking the people. And it's where the prophet tells David, build an altar. So David goes and he says, okay, I've got to build an altar. So I'm going to go to the guy that owns the threshing floor, in this case, Araunah. And he says, I want to buy it. And he says, no, I'll give it to you. You're the king. Let me give it to you. And this is David's answer. No, I insist on paying for it. I love this phrase. I will not sacrifice to the Lord my God burnt offerings that cost me nothing. So Araunah was going to give him the floor. He was going to give him the things to sacrifice. David insists, my sacrifice has to be costly. It's got to cost me something. And so David bought the threshing floor and the oxen and paid 50 shekels of silver for them. David built an altar to the Lord there and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then the Lord answers his prayer on behalf of the land, and the plague on Israel was stopped. You're like, fun story, preacher. Why are you telling me this? So glad you asked. 2 Chronicles chapter 3. Then Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on where? Have we heard about this tonight? Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David. It was where? On the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite, the place provided by David. So Solomon comes along, he's building the temple. And where is he building the temple? Mount Moriah. And on Mount Moriah, there's a threshing floor that David had bought because he saw the angel of the Lord and he sacrificed and built an altar there. And now it's the place where the temple is built. So if you go there today, you cannot see this. But luckily I have a picture. This is what is called the foundation stone. What is the foundation stone? Glad you asked. It is the bedrock of Mount Moriah. And today, the reason you can't see this is because there's a church that sits over it, namely a mosque that sits over it with a big golden dome right on top of the Temple Mount. The Dome of the Rock, it's called, one of the very important sites to Islam. And this is most likely the threshing floor of Araunah on the top of Mount Moriah, where Solomon built the temple. And Jewish tradition says it was on this particular rock, this bedrock, this piece of rock, where the Holy of Holies was. I don't know if you can see, but there's a little indentation right here that happens to be the exact dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant.
Is that right?
And we don't know, we have no proof. But the thought is this indentation in this rock is where the Ark of the Covenant once sat, which means this is the Holy of Holies, potentially. Well, it makes sense because it's on the Temple Mount. And if you go to the Wailing Wall, one of the reasons the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall is one of the most holy sites for Israel is because it's the wall that for the Israelis was closest to the Holy of Holies. It's the Western Wall because to the east of Jerusalem is the Mount of Olives, right? Which is where Ezekiel saw the Spirit of the Lord go and then ascend, and where he promised that God would return in the same way he left the temple. And it's the place where Jesus on Palm Sunday came down, because that's the eastern side. So the western side is into the city. It's kind of in the middle of there of where the temple would be. So we don't know. This is some of it tradition, but I think it's pretty fascinating. That could be potentially. And I can't get there. Dome of the Rock, you have to be Muslim to go in this place. And the Jews have no access to it right now. It's quite fascinating. But this is that. And if you were to ask the Muslims what this is, they would tell you that this is the very rock on which Abraham laid his son Ishmael to sacrifice him. Because part of the story in the Quran, part of the tradition, actually the Quran does not specify Ishmael, but Imams through the ages have said it's Ishmael. He's the one through whom Muslims trace that. This was the same rock, the same base of the altar that Abraham built. They would say Ishmael, we would say Isaac. So we got this, and here's just for fun, it has nothing to do with biblical story. This is actually a hole that you can look down, and there's a chamber underneath this rock that's called the Well of Souls now. This kind of see here, you can go into it. Look it up, you can find pictures on the interwebs. It's a pretty good sized rock, it's a pretty good sized chamber. Some speculated, and this, I'm not buying this, I really think this is preaching, that this was the hole they drained the blood through. But if you read the accounts of how they did the sacrifices for Israel, because the Holy of Holies and the blood inside, they didn't drain the blood through the floor. It was caught outside and brought in and splattered. And the blood was then taken out of the carcass and dumped outside the city. There wasn't a hole, they just dumped the blood in, had this big room that was caught in. So I don't think that. But
What was that rock?
it's a pretty good sized rock. Yeah. So
That's the Ark of the Covenant. That just looks like a little square to us, but in the huge.
Yeah.
well, we can just go to Exodus and figure out, it'll tell us kind of the footprint of the Ark of the Covenant. Courtyard in front of the Ark. Have them make an ark of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and 1.5 cubits high. So 2.5 cubits by 1.5 cubits. 18 inches is a kind of an estimate for a cubit. So 2.5, 18, 36 plus 9, 45 by 1.5 cubits, 27. So 2.5 by almost 4 feet would be kind of the footprint. And this little indentation seems to be about that big. Again, I can't go in with my ruler. I could, and then I would never come out. I would be sacrificed on that rock if I tried to get in as a non-Muslim. But it's a pretty good sized rock. If this is 2 by 4, you can kind of interpolate. And it's the mountain. It's not a rock they put on the mountain. It's actually part of the mountain. It's the kind of the top rock of the precipice of the mountain, which would make a great threshing floor, right? You can thresh all kind of things and have the hard surface, and would make a great base for an altar. You could.
What is that to the left? Looks like a wall.
Yeah, this is nobody's allowed to come onto this. So you see that the prayer rugs on the outside. So you're not going to step on this rug.
And it looks like a fence maybe down there in the corner.
Here,
A fence.
this is, I believe it's a windows for the outside. So it's an octagonal building,
Oh, it's a building out there.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
I didn't look up the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. And it's the golden dome you see as you look down over the city of Jerusalem. That's the top of this building. And then it's octagonal in the middle of a huge courtyard. And this rock, this is the rock the dome is over. It's also thought to be the rock that Muhammad was ascended from into heaven. So it's got a lot of tradition. By the way, the reason it's called the foundation stone is in Jewish mystical tradition. This is the place God started to create the world, created everything from this place. That's tradition. It's Kabbalah, that's tradition. Don't take it, but that's why it's called the foundation stone. So it's a pretty important place for at least 3 religions, because what happens on this rock? Well, we know that the story we just read likely happened here on the top of Mount Moriah. And we know that this is also a rock on the top of the Temple Mount, where the temple was built, maybe the very threshing floor, so that this became a place where sacrifice was the norm, right? So this became a place that symbolized sacrifice. And that you make sacrifice in the way a lot of people think. We make sacrifice because we got to make God happy. But that's not the point of sacrifice, right? One of the interesting things about the David story in 2 Samuel 24 is when he's given the choice, this is his reasoning for picking the plagues. Not that it's only 3 days versus 3 months or 3 years, but it's this. I would rather fall into the hands of the Lord, for his mercy is great, but don't let me fall into human hands. I would rather have God unleash his fury on me for 3 days, which sounds pretty potent, than let men have their way with me for longer. That's David's reasoning, which makes sense, because when God reveals himself to Moses in Exodus 34, he says, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, these are the words of God's own mouth, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation. Doesn't say this here, but remember, he promises blessing to 1,000 generations. So God's blessing is 300 times greater than his curse. Always remember that. And so David says, if this is going to happen, I'm going to trust God's mercy, even in the midst of his justice. It's a pretty remarkable thing. And so back to this idea of sacrifice. We've got to be careful to think that sacrifice is what makes God like us or makes God happy. Because in the story of David, he's told to make a sacrifice, right? He's told, go buy this threshing floor. This may be the exact threshing floor he buys. Go buy the threshing floor and build an altar and make a sacrifice, right? When does God relent? Before or after David makes the sacrifice? Before. Before David gets the instruction from Gad to go and build the altar, God has already, the Lord relented concerning the disaster. He said, enough, withdraw your hand. Why? Because David said, I'd rather throw myself into the Lord's hands and trust his mercy than go to his compassion and gracious. And we've got to be very aware that destruction, punishment, cursing, it's not like we have to act and then God relents. We just have to trust who God is. That he is who? He is Jehovah Jireh, or Yahweh Jireh, the God who sees to it, the God who provides. For it is said to this day, on the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. And while this was a place where Abraham laid likely his son Isaac, and while this could very well have been the place where the Holy of Holies was and the temple sacrifices were carried out, we know that not too far from this very place, there was another sacrifice. That what Abraham did for Isaac typified. because Isaac becomes a type of Christ, whose father willing to kill him, but ultimately another way of forgiveness is provided. And God who looks at us and sees the fact that we deserve his punishment, his justice, chooses instead to express himself in mercy. And we say, yeah, of course he did, because Jesus was crucified 2,000 years ago. Yeah, but the scriptures also tell us before the foundation of the world, God, how it happened, I don't know, before the foundation of the world, Christ was crucified. I have to look up the exact chapter and verse for that. But the idea was, again, we don't have to do anything to earn God's mercy. We just have to make sure we're standing in the flow. Make sure we know that he is the God who revealed himself to Moses, Abraham, and everybody before and after as the God who is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. And how does he do it? Not because we act or sacrifice or pray, but because out of his own character, he has already decided what needed to be done and took care of it. Because on the mountain of the Lord, that place, it was provided. And that is the end of my musings. What you got? Comments, questions, thoughts?
Kind of curious, you said that's a window, so that entire dome, it encloses the entire rock? Is it enclosed?
This is a really live computer. Let's just do this.
Yeah, let's look at the dome on the rock and see.
Realize I don't have to tell you to look it
That'd
up.
be huge. Building, that rock looks awfully large to me. When did the Muslims take over?
In the Byzantine era, I believe. So this is the structure that's there. You see that grading on these windows? Obviously there's a wall there. So that it's inside there. That and for perspective, here's people. So it's a pretty good size building, which means that's a pretty good size rock in the center of it. Let me see if I can. There's another picture of the foundation stone that I saw that I picked out. Did I spell it right? Nope. Is that the one we did? Here's one from a little higher up. Okay. It'll get bigger. There it is. So,
All right, so I'm thinking of,
these are people.
yeah.
So that you can see these are steps that lead down to the well of souls. It's a different orientation. Here's the hole that on that picture was up there. There's the indentation that I mentioned might have been where the ark sat. You can see these are people. It's a pretty good size piece of stone. And you've got, a bit of a courtyard. You can see this would be the cupola of the dome here with the circular section.
Yeah.
So if you
Outside.
kind of back it up, that other picture,
There.
it will open.
Did you see that when you were there?
Yes. So you can go up on the Temple Mount. You have to pass through security. You have to pass through Israeli security first because you come out of Israel, and then you go into this Muslim holy place, and then you run into I guess you would say Muslims who are the security forces, and they will make sure you are dressed appropriately. For instance, all of our ladies, even though it was winter, it was December when we were there, had to put on a skirt. Even if you're wearing long pants, you have to wear a skirt. So they have these skirts piled there. And if you had short sleeves, they would put on a long sleeve shirt. And I don't know if we had to wear any head coverings. I don't remember if anybody did. So you go through the armed Israeli security, you go through the Muslim security, then you can wander this whole huge courtyard. Let me see. We can see a different picture of the Dome of the Rock from, let's do this, Dome of the Rock from the Mount of Olives. There you go. So, yes, just trying to get like an aerial shot so you can see the. That is not what I'm. Here's a shot. So that is not one there. Will that get bigger? Okay. So to give you an idea, this is actually the holiest site on this whole structure, this particular mosque. But the most prominent feature is this mosque, the dome. I forget the name of this mosque, but this is actually considered holier than that mosque. On Muslim holy festivals, there could be 100,000 people up here between this courtyard and this courtyard. It's massive. The western wall is here. It's kind of down street level a little bit more up there. So you would go down. You can actually go under. In this part, there's a tour. You can go under and see some of the foundational under whatever, what may have been under the temple. There's some. The weird thing about Israel, because of its history, is there are strata. So you go to a place and you might see something that looks Byzantine from the 1500. You might see something from the Crusade era when the Crusaders came in and liberated the Holy Land. Before that, it was all Muslim control of all of it. And so you see these strata. Like here's way down here where nobody sees, you have to dig down to, is when Jesus was alive. And then you come up here and it's after this war and after this conquest, or the buildings they built here. And then the next level with these buildings and the rubble. And then you see what was the most recent. Temple Mount's not like that so much because it's such a key and holy place. There's less of the stratification. But if you go down in this tour, when you're not in the Temple Mount, you can see here's actually Roman stones that were laid here. And if you were to go, is this the teaching steps over here?
Really a tall mountain, like, think of a mountain, more like a hill.
No, so the Mount of Olives is on this side, and it's much taller.
Okay.
You look down on this from the Mount of Olives, which is weird because everybody goes up to Jerusalem, but that's because you have to go up just about every way around it to get over something to go down to go back up. So it's a well-protected city. Probably why it's been there so long and why David chose it. This fascinating. Anyway,
The sculpture or the rock that you showed us earlier with the Ark of the Covenant, you said that was under a mosque, but it wasn't under these two.
it's under this one.
Oh, okay,
It's inside this mosque.
okay.
Why is that other one for you?
Don't know.
Okay.
Mecca is the holiest site in Islam. Medina is the second one, and this is the third holiest site. This mosque, I think this is pretty high on the list, and it's much more ornate, but this is, for whatever reason, higher on the list. All right. Got anything else? Comments? Anybody online? No? Nope. Okay, then I shall pray. Thank you for sticking around with me. Father, we thank you for the gift of Jesus. We thank you that in him we find the full and final provision for sin. And I thank you, Lord, that didn't catch you off guard. that you are the God who sees, and you are the God most high, and you are the God who provides or sees to the needs of your people. And certainly our greatest need was to be forgiven and restored to a right relationship with you. And I thank you that in Jesus you have done that. Lord, thank you that on that mountain of the Lord, it will be provided, as Abraham learned and demonstrated. Oh, Lord, may we be willing to trust you every day, to trust you even when you ask things that make us uncomfortable or seem bigger than we can handle. Lord, help us to remember you are the God who provides. You will provide, as you did then, as you have, and as you will. Thank you, Lord, for your faithfulness. Lord, we thank you again for your word, that we can learn from it, see and learn the revelation of who you are. So help us to, through this study, come to know you better and to love you more, because you are showing us more of your goodness and your grace, your holiness and your justice and your righteousness and your mercy. Pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.